part of what our world is going through has been described by that movie called The Matrix. How many of you saw The Matrix? Remember that? I tell stories about that when I'm speaking about the Matrix and where they use the not yet kind of thinking and real important stuff. Oh, we got that right there. Am I in your way? Just come on up and bring it up, Father. There we go. I love it. That's great. And in The Matrix, people were controlled. Well, our next title is about transcending the Matrix, which many people have done. And a way to do that, our next speaker is going to tell us about that, about working with your inner self, tapping into those areas that are most important to you. He does this as a person who does body work and does healing in Los Angeles. He's originally from Germany, and join me in welcoming now, Bernhard Guenther.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be here. It's my first time here. I can't believe how big it is, or God, so it's awesome. You guys are amazing. You guys can hear me? Louder? Yes. Hello. It's not on? Here we go. Excuse me. So this is the topic of my talk. Transcending the Matrix, Occult Forces, and the Importance of Esoteric Self-Work. So we're diving a bit deeper into the occult, esotericism, and fringe topics. Now, when we talk about transcending the Matrix, first we need to ask ourselves, what is the Matrix control system, right? I'm sure many of you are aware of the basics, so I'm divided into like 3 layers. So as a general overview, I want to just cover the basics to set the context before I go deeper. Now, what I call the superficial first 3D level of the Matrix is what you guys are all aware of, right? Government, military, police, pharmaceuticals, banking, academia, entertainment, what I call official culture, right? The basic programming and conditioning, social engineering we all are subjected to since birth. When you go a bit deeper into the lower level of the 3D matrix, many of you guys are aware of the shadow government, secret societies, Illuminati, geoengineering, MK Ultra projects, also ties into the UFO phenomenon, the secret space program, and many others. So I'm sure many of you guys are aware of that as well. But what I really want to dive into is the hyperdimensional matrix, the non-physical aspect of the control system. With occult forces, and occult, I'm sure most of you are aware of, means simply hidden, not evil. And if you look into ancient esoteric teachings, they all have talked about this force or forces, these occult forces that have reigned over humanity for thousands of years and influenced humanity and ourselves, most often working through us, to establish this quote-unquote civilization, human civilization we have now. Now, I want to list some of these sources that speak about this hyperdimensional cult force. There are many, many sources. Some of you guys may be aware of it, be it the archons from the Gnostic tradition, right? Or the Shaiitans from Sufism, the jinn from Arabian mythology. There's a very profound work I recently got into by a guy named Sri Aurobindo and his integral yoga. He talks about the occult hostile forces. And I'm sure you guys are aware of that yoga is way beyond just the physical asana practice. I mean, yoga simply, the practice of yoga means a union with the divine. So it's a deep esoteric practice that goes way beyond the physical practice. And Sri Aurobindo has actually a fascinating life story. He was a revolutionary anarchist and got imprisoned and achieved literary enlightenment in solitary imprisonment in India, and then founded his own integral yoga. But he also talked about occult hostile forces that reign over humanity. Now, another very interesting teaching is based on esoteric Christianity, the true Christian teachings before the church corrupted it and turned it into a dogmatic religion to control humanity. And there's an incredible trilogy by Boris Muraviev called Gnosis, and he talks about the general law, which reigns over humanity and acts on humanity to keep them down, and acts on anyone who's trying to escape or wake up. And it works on unseen levels. Then we have, of course, the Predator from Castaneda's work. I'm not sure how many guys are aware of that, where he talks about the topic of all topics, the teachings of Don Juan in his last book, talking about the Predator that came out of space and took over humans' lives. Then we have, most often in Hermeticism, they are called the Lords of Destiny. And it also ties into the UFO phenomenon, the negative aliens of reptilians and greys, and the UFO phenomenon is a whole topic on its own. It is not really what most people believe, this Star Trek scenario of physical aliens coming from physical planets and physical spaceship, but it's also interdimensional, paraphysical, hyperdimensional phenomena with these entities popping in and out of 3D reality. Okay, so, but what it's important to keep in mind that this exists outside our five-sensory perception. Right? That's why it's so hard to recognize and basically impossible to prove scientifically via our five-sensory perception. Now, the goal of esoteric work in general, right, is it's deeper self-work, to raise your level of being, to connect with your soul essence to the divine and the divinity within, and to raise your level of being to a higher frequency, where you then also tap into gnosis, higher knowledge, which the intellect and mind and logic alone cannot grasp. In fact, thought is a hindrance in all of that. But when you engage in this deep esoteric work, then as Sri Aurobindo talked about, you establish yogic consciousness and you can perceive these forces directly. It's an experience. And that can be visually, energetically, when you're clairvoyant on these levels, perceive them. But also, if you're very sensitive, beyond the five senses, and have this intuitive sense, and you can see how these forces operate in this world, most often also are acting through other people and acting through your own minds. Now, here's again these three levels of the matrix, as I just described, in a general setup, and I like the analogy of the tree. You see the outer levels of the matrix on the outer branches of the tree, the obvious control system we are all familiar with. On the more hidden level of the 3D, we have what I mentioned before, the secret societies. But on the root level, that's really key to understand. On the root level and the hidden, hidden away from the physical matrix is the occult forces, right? And what's very important to understand that the outer levels of the matrix, the 3D matrix, are most often just the symptoms of this hidden force, right? And most often we all focus more on what we can see in front of us. That's fine and good. But these forces actually work through all these institutions, through all the governments, through all the people in power without their awareness. Now, even psychopaths, who, as Max said, who run the world, actually fully possessed by these demonic entities. I mean, that's another topic of all topics, so to speak. We are 8 billion people on this planet. We all look the same, but we're not all the same inside. And there are vast different levels of consciousness and being. I mean, this ties into another very unknown topic about organic portals and soulless humans, who actually are not born with a soul, but fully occupied by these demonic forces. And they control all these institutions. So on the higher level, even, in terms of secret societies, when you talk about whatever, Zionists, Rothschilds, Illuminati, they themselves are like pawns on a chessboard, right? So to understand that these forces act through us and through these institutions. So it's important to not fall into like what Plato talked about, the Plato's allegory of the cave, to just focus on the shadows on the wall. Because if we just focus on the 3D aspect, it's like cutting the branches of the tree. Eventually they grow back in different ways. Now what I've mentioned before, you saw on that list, there's also a very fascinating book by Paul Levy. I don't know if you guys heard about it, Wetiko, Dispelling the Curse of Evil. That's the Native American term for this alien virus that has invaded us and works through us. Okay. Now, you might want to ask, what's the whole agenda of these occult forces? What are they after? Right? On the physical level, we understand how this control system works. They want more power for themselves, right? They're greedy, more power. They want to dumb us down, and less freedom and all of this. We're all aware of that. But really on a deeper level, it's about war of consciousness. It's a spiritual war on unseen levels. And if you remember the film The Matrix, by the way, I almost feel I need to apologize for doing so many references to the film The Matrix. I know it's been almost overdone. But this film really has some deep esoteric truths about our reality. And if you remember when Neo woke up, from his dream world, the illusion, he unplugs himself, and he sees these fields of humans being grown as batteries for these machines, which they feed off of, using humans as a life force. And that's really an excellent analogy of this hyperdimensional matrix. These forces, these occult forces, these negative entities, feed off of this lower consciousness frequency. Especially, it sustains them, like life feeds on life, like we feed on life, be it plants, animals, whatever. But on these unseen realms, energy or consciousness is food. So what they feed off in general is the frequency of fear, hate, anger, suffering, anxiety, panic, we all experience in our own lives or on a global level through wars. So these entities, basically the modus operandi is divide and conquer, to pit humanity against each other, to create wars, just to create this luge, this frequency. Right? It's really important to understand from their level of being, it doesn't even matter who is in power, as long as people fight each other and create this frequency. Now here's a fascinating quote from Rudolf Steiner. He has an amazing body of work. It's translated from German from 1907. There are beings in the spiritual realms for whom anxiety and fear emanating from human beings offer welcome food. People not yet so efficiently convinced of that statement could understand it to be comparatively only. But for those who are familiar with this phenomenon, it is a reality. If fear and anxiety radiates from people and they break out in panic, then these creatures find welcome nutrition and they become more and more powerful. These beings are hostile towards humanity. Everything that feeds on negative feelings, on anxiety, fear, and superstition, despair or doubt, are in reality hostile forces in supersensible worlds launching cruel attacks on human beings while they are being fed. Therefore, it is above all necessary to begin with that the person who enters the spiritual world overcomes fear, feelings of helplessness, despair, and anxiety. But these are exactly the feelings that belong to contemporary culture and materialism, because it estranges people from the spiritual world. It is especially suited to evoke hopelessness and fear of the unknown in people, thereby calling up the above-mentioned hostile forces against them. And as I highlighted the last sentence, that's what we see in our lives, right? When we grow up and try to make a living, right? To engage in the rat race. And we're so disconnected from our inner guidance, our own divinity, from nature, obviously. We don't even question human nature, right? We are living in an artificial, almost product of this alien virus mind. So naturally, we always create this luge, this frequency for them, right? Like as Krishnamurti said, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. But that's what many people try to do. They adjust to a world where pathology has become normalized. Okay, so where did it all start? Now, a lot of sources hint at that, as the ancient shaman called the topic of all topics, of hundreds and thousands of years ago, where we were literally genetically modified from our original DNA blueprint, our full potential as a human being. And it's actually the analogy of the fall from Eden is the fall from our original state. And we've been downgraded into ego consciousness, kept in 5th sensory perception, based on survival, right, fear, separateness, and all of that. Also disconnected ourselves from our inner authority, our emancipated selves, right? And our own inner body technology. The body is a beautiful organism. It has a high intelligence. It's actually always striving towards health and wholeness. And we have superpowers we are not aware of, but we have externalized technology. That's another thing, right? We think we're so advanced with our gadgets and all of that, but that in itself is a trap, right? Because it keeps us locked in our heads out there, disembodied, disconnected from our uniqueness and our personal inner guidance, right? And the more people are disembodied, disconnected from the two selves, they look outside for guidance, for somebody to tell them what to do. It's almost the origin of authoritarianism. Okay, here's another fascinating quote from Sri Aurobindo, whom I mentioned before. Men are being constantly invaded by the occult hostile forces, and there are a great number of men who are partly or entirely under their influence. Some are possessed by them. Others are incarnations of hostile beings. At the present moment, they are very active all over the earth. The apparent freedom and self-assertion of our personal being, to which we are so profoundly attached, conceal a most pitiable subjection to 1,000 suggestions, impulsions, forces, which we have made extraneous to your little person. Our ego, boasting of freedom, is at every moment the slave, toy, and puppet of countless beings, powers, forces, influences in universal nature. All life is the play of universal forces. The individual gives a personal form to these universal forces, but he can choose whether he shall respond or not to the action of a particular force. Only most people do not really choose. They indulge in the play of the forces. Your illnesses, depressions, etc. are the repeated play of such forces. It is only when one makes oneself free of them that one can be a true person, have a true life, and also true free will. But one can be free only by living in the divine. And here Sri Aurobindo gives us a hint to the way out, which ties into the deeper work of esoteric self-work. Oops. Now, as I mentioned before, the modus operandi of the matrix on their levels is divide and conquer on unseen levels, pitting humanity against each other, as I mentioned before, to produce this lower frequency ego consciousness or reactive behavior, right? Now, that's why a lot of us, we can be very reactive, and it's natural, right? When we get pissed off and project hate and anger onto other people, right? And it's normal in the waking up process. I mean, there's a saying, the truth will piss you off, will set you free, but it will piss you off first. So there's nothing to be said against anger, right? It's an energy, a frequency, creative energy we can use productively. But when we project it onto others, the matrix has us. And the trap, really, of the divide and conquer strategy is the trap of identification, when we identify ourselves with. You see it on the basic level, you identify yourself with the nation, a flag, whatever. You already create separation towards others who identify with themselves with a different flag and all these abstract concepts, right? Or on the political level, you identify yourself as a liberal Democrat, you hate on the other side, the right wing, right? And the one side always wants to get rid of the other side. And it will never happen, because we live in this 3D reality in duality. The moment you identify yourself on one side, on the metaphysical level, you automatically create the other side with all its variations, right? And even, unfortunately, I see it in the so-called truth movement, especially on social media, when people go off on each other and, rage on each other. And I have to say, there are amazing people out there speaking truth from an intellectual perspective, but sometimes the level of the emotional intelligence is on the level of a toddler or high school bully, right? But understandable, we have never been taught emotional intelligence in school about our bodies and intuition. The intellect is worshipped, right? I'm not denouncing the intellect, but it's very limited if we get stuck up here. So divide and conquer, that's, the best example, for example, the whole flat earth debate, I'm sure you guys heard about, right? The flat earthers hate on the globalists, ballers, whatever, right? Especially nowadays, if you don't believe in the flat earth model, right away you are a shill, supposedly, which Max Egan found out the hard way. So let's understand that, in terms to transcend the matrix, it is about also transcending duality and connect with something higher beyond our ego consciousness. Now, there are many traps on the awakening process, and one of the traps is the trap of the revolutionary mind, as Gurdjieff talked about as well, the physical revolt, right, of taking out the other side, and then you engage in this, you create the frequency, you become actually that which you fight against. There's also an amazing quote by, again, Sri Aurobindo over 100 years ago. Look at what happened in 1914, or for that matter, at all that is and has been happening in human history. The eye of the yogin sees not only the outward events and persons and causes, but the enormous forces which precipitate them into action. If the men who fought were instruments in the hands of rulers and financiers, these in turn were mere puppets in the clutch of those hidden hyperdimensional forces. When one is habituated to see things behind, one is no longer prone to be touched by the outward aspects or to expect any remedy from political, institutional, or social changes. The only way out is through the descent of an embodied consciousness which is not the puppet of these forces, but is greater than they are. Which brings me to this book, The Importance of Self-Work and Embodiment. Now, right away, I want to disclaimer, I'm not suggesting the New Age pill to just gaze your navel and just shut yourself out and escape the world, right? It's about work within and without. But the inner work, I feel, is most often very limited or missing in activists. Because we have to understand, it's actually much easier, so to speak, to figure out and point out the lies and the distortion and all of that in the outer world, in the 3D world. But from an esoteric perspective, lies to the self are the most harmful and the hardest to detect, because none of us are fully awake or enlightened. We all are actually also wounded and conditioned and programmed in many ways we're not even aware of, even beyond what we see from government and whatnot. But, just growing up in this world where we have been dealing with these forces and dealing with severe conditioning and programming since childhood. Literally by the age 7, most of us are completely very conditioned, wounded, and programmed. So the rest of our lives, we're just trying to decondition and deprogram ourselves and remember who we truly are. But we all have our reactive behaviors, right? Our triggers, where we react mechanically but do not respond consciously, right? And most often, people with the most well-meaning intentions, big hearts, can sometimes do more harm than any good, if they don't check where actually their behaviors come from, right? And how we are programmed with all our individual issues and stuff. So what does it mean to engage in self-work? Well, on the basic level, it's about developing the observer, right? To observe yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, and all of that, and also come to a place of more mindfulness, right? To still the mind, to be relaxed, right? To not always do. One aspect of self-work I find very important is shadow work. I'm not sure if you guys heard of Carl Jung, right? And his concept of shadow work, that we have unconscious parts which we're not aware of, but projected onto somebody else, especially when it's driven by strong emotions. Again, when we hate on others, right? When we feel others need to be punished, taken out, kill the psychopaths and all of that, kill the elite. We're, as Morpheus would say, the Matrix has you if you think that way, right? They want to engage in that. They want us to fight each other. Now, I'm not suggesting the love and light New Age approach of just all is love and light and just why can't we get along. The New Age religion itself is an iconic creation as well, right? But it needs to happen hand in hand, the inner work and the outer work, right? And most often the inner work is harder because we need to confront ourselves, emotions we have suppressed for so long, right? A lot of adults are still children or babies in adult suits, so to speak, from basic parental conditioning, which you cannot blame our parents either because they have been conditioned. It goes over cycles and literally generations. I mean, especially in this day and age, so much is coming up. That's why the mind alone, it cannot figure it out, right? We need to get into our bodies, into our emotions to feel them and transmute them. That's the work of the alchemist, the alchemical transmutation from lead into gold, to really burn, to rise into your spiritual self, to connect with the divinity within. Now, the divine and God is also a trigger word for many people, understandable, because we have been conditioned with the dogmatic religion, with this authority outside that judges us in that nonsense. And then people jump on the other side of the coin, become atheists and materialists, very materialism. But this is an iconic creation as well. Like the divine is within us, right? Our soul potential, our uniqueness. And this whole process of awakening is also the process of embodiment, the importance to get out of our heads into our bodies, because it gives us so many clues in terms of, like I said, our inner guidance and authority, right? So that's why any body-mind practices, yoga, qigong, receiving body work are great, but it needs to go beyond that. Even if you look at the root word of embodiment, it literally means a soul or spirit invested in the flesh. It's synonyms are incarnation and whatnot. So the process of embodiment, this awakening process, is also to, like Guenther said, to grow your soul, to bring the soul to the front and make your ego, your personality, a conscious expression of that. Most of us, we are still identified with who we think we are, which are just memories and experiences from our lives. But there's, something deeper within us, which also connects all of us. Now, this process is not an easy process, right? Because this evolution of consciousness, especially in this time in age, which I call the time of transition, it's happening. You see the craziness in the world. You see it within your own lives and your personal stuff that's coming up. It's not this linear road up, to more love and bliss and awareness, and we're going to have a big party soon that everybody's free. It's an ascent and descent at the same time. It's like a spiral out and spiral in and around. Like everything needs to be brought up to awareness. Right now, there's the divine force is also trying to anchor itself, but we need to build the vessel to anchor the divine force within us, which means we need to clear out all our own shit. All our wounds, childhood wounding, ancestral over generations, to make room for this higher frequency to anchor itself, and that has profound effect on the external world. Because if you understand the outer is an expression of the inner, nothing is isolated, right? And I'm not again falling into the New Age trap of the secret of just thinking happy thoughts and positive things and all this mindfuck. Excuse me. That's not how we create reality. It's really the shamanic descent into the underworld, right? To battle the demons within and without, internally, to ignite the alchemical fire, right? And then the more we anchor this divine frequency, this will manifest in the outer world. And we, yes, we need to spread awareness and help people awaken and spread information, right? But you have more power by, like Gandhi said, being the change you want to see, and that means of carrying that energy, that frequency. And that really has profound effects to affect others, and all these institutions then will disintegrate naturally. Like I feel like we're in this really intense time right now, and more is coming up, and we haven't really seen anything yet. Now this descent and ascent, also as Sadhguru talked about, the higher one rises, the farther one is pulled down. Evolution does not move higher and higher into an ever more heavenly heaven, but deeper and deeper. Each evolutionary cycle closes a little lower, a little nearer to the center, where the supreme high and low, heaven and earth, will finally meet. The more light the seeker possesses, the more darkness he or she uncovers. Or as Carl Jung said, no one, it said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And that's literally means also when Carl Jung said one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that means not only making the darkness conscious outside in terms of corruption, and the evil forces out there, which we see physically, but our own darkness, right? Which simply means what we are not aware of and conscious of. So we need to go within as well, right? And align with our true uniqueness. And we also have to understand, like I mentioned before, there are 8 billion humans on this planet with vast different levels of consciousness, soul lessons, soul talents, right? So what works for one may not work for another. Who are we to judge what another person's soul lesson is, right? So we need to be mindful not to project onto others what works for us. It might not be the case. But, in that sense, everybody has their own process. Hi.
You doing a good job?
I'm doing a job.
Do that 1 minute.
All right, thank you. So I feel these are very exciting times, very intense times, but exciting times. I mean, it shows with this conference here, and it's beautiful. But my intention is for you to look a bit deeper and see that there are unseen levels. We may need to look into it as well to really align with something higher that is happening, that is not under our control, the divine force, the beauty, right? The true love, the true essence, and the true joy of the soul. Thank you.
Bernhard Guenther, ladies and gentlemen. Bernhard Guenther. Thank you, sir. Dankeschön.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people.
To see if we could become something more.
So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
In time, the state will know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that it's right, yet to fail all the same. Dread it. Run from it. Freedom still arrives.
Vacate the state. Engage all the speakers and get this man a microphone.
Fun isn't something that one considers when eradicating tyranny. But this does put a smile on my face.
Who the hell are you guys?